I think we're live. There we go. Good morning, everybody. My hair is doing something funky again today, and I'm all thrown off because it's backwards on my screen. Anyway, good to see you. uh, we have a lot to cover today, like a lot. It's pretty incredible what's going to be happening over the next this week and next week. And because we will not have a live next week, I'm going to cover next week today. So you will have this for your reference, and I will be posting things as they come on social media as well. But I wanted us to be able to have the space to really ground in and talk about this stuff. You will probably see social media astrologers across the board talking about this week and next week for multiple reasons. So, again, creating this space where we can have some astro sanity, if you will. And if you have any questions or any kind of concerns that come up for you about should I be worried about this, we can talk about it. So yes, getting all that sort of grounded in at the top of this. I do want to make sure that I cover the eclipse. I do want to make sure that I cover Saturn moving into Aries, which happens next week, and the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, which happens on the 20th. And I believe by the time Mercury goes retrograde, we will be back together again. So those are my main three things that I want to cover. I can sort of combine Saturn in Aries and the conjunction with Neptune. So it's really like two things that we want to cover. Also, not ignoring the good things in life. Venus comes into Pisces tomorrow on the 10th. And I love that because you know what coincides with Venus moving into the sign of her exaltation? The Peace Walk will be arriving in DC at that time. And I think that's really, really cool. So, again, Venus in Pisces doing the benefic things in the sign of her exaltation, trying the other benefic who is in the sign of his exaltation. That trine between them will perfect on the 22nd. We'll talk more about that later. But just knowing good things are happening, even though there's a lot of stressful things that we're hearing about. So I want to like spotlight Venus because girl can't catch a break anyway. But I want to spotlight her for the fact that she is coming into Pisces tomorrow. And with the ingress of the lesser benefic into her exaltation, we also get the ingress of the peace walk. Could you create a better metaphor or analogy or expression of Venus coming into Pisces than the peace walk arriving in DC? It's just beautiful poetry, and I'm very excited about it. Into the Ravenwood, I was able to catch up to the monks last. They came through here, I believe it was Monday, and catching up to them was I've been on a storm chase before where we chased tornadoes all through the middle of America, middle of the United States, I should say. And it was very much the same. Dan was in his work vehicle. I was in my car. We were on speakerphone, and it was just a game of turn here, go this way. But we did make it. We made it, and it was wonderful. I did post, it's just a minute long video of them walking by, but that is on my social media platforms, TikTok and Instagram, I think primarily. So I did achieve that goal, which was great. Aloka, the dog, was not walking with them at the time. He's recovering from surgery, so resting as he should in one of the cars, but I sent him love for sure. So yes, that did happen. um, yeah, cool. Let's see. Just catching up on some stuff here. All right. Yes. So looks good. Yay. Yes, I'm so glad too. It really made my day. Another thing I did in the past week, anybody who was on our Wednesday Twitch stream saw this already, but I actually finished my first crochet project that wasn't a wooble, and it is my little melt the ice hat that I made. And I'm very proud of it. And it's adorable. And it fits, it's warm, it does all the things a hat should do. And I'm blown away that I actually did it. It's got a couple errors in it, but it works. So the other thing I'm proud of this week, and it sits right here. So if you're ever looking for it, that's where it is. Cool. So I thought it might be fun to show you how, as an astrologer, I sort of look at an eclipse and calculate it and analyze it and sort of track what it's supposed to mean. And the eclipse that's coming up in Aquarius should be, and I'll tell you why I'm doing the caveat of should later, should be a really fun experiment for us to play with because it is not visible to most of the world, which is kind of a good thing. It is not visible to most of the world. It is only visible over the South Pole, the Antarctica to be more precise, and then parts of countries that sort of reach that far south on the globe. So, because of this, many astrologers, including Ptolemy, it was very much an event where if you could see it, it could see you. And so, if you can't see it, you don't have to worry about it. So that's one of the first things that I want to say as we come into eclipse season. Um, Keep in mind that perhaps this eclipse will go by without a lot happening that pertains to this eclipse. That's very important because though this eclipse is occurring by transit, the other really fun thing about eclipses is their timing does not necessarily occur immediately along with the event of their transit. Ptolemy gave us a calculation that I will show you that shows that solar eclipses, and I just realized I have to redo my math a little bit, but I was doing lunar eclipse math. I should have been doing a solar eclipse math, but I can actually, no, I accidentally did it right. Perfect. That's how math works for me most of the time. So, what we find is that with solar eclipses, you actually want to take the duration of the eclipse and find out what proportion of an hour is it. And that proportion for a solar eclipse will be the portion of a year that the eclipse's significations will unfold during. So if an eclipse lasts an hour, then what it is going to do will also last a year. For a lunar eclipse, you bring that down to a month. If the lunar eclipse lasted an hour, they very rarely do. But if the lunar eclipse lasted an hour, then whatever that eclipse brings about will last a month, right? Year for the sun because it has a year cycle, month for the moon because it has a month cycle. So it's really easy to remember. However, that does not mean that those things that year begins the day of the eclipse. Oh, no, no. There's another way that there's another thing you have to do that makes it even more specific for the location that you're in. So we will do this together and I will be checking my math because I did it before we jumped on today and I always have to check my math. I actually have literal brain damage when it comes to math. So it doesn't usually go right the first time for me. I have to do it a bunch of times before I actually bring it about. This is why when you have a consultation with me, I study your chart for like an hour or more before meeting you, usually even maybe a day before meeting you, so that I have time to check my math and make sure that I get it right for you. So far, so good on that one. But if we have any math whizzes in the comments, you can help me out here as well. So when we think about this eclipse, it's going to be taking place in Aquarius, but it is not visible to most of the globe. So we're going to pretend it is, right? I need to preface that. We're going to pretend that this eclipse is visible to most of the globe. If we see something that shows up during this eclipse season that we're like, oh my God, it's the eclipse, or someone on social media astrology says the astrology is astrologing, it's not necessarily this eclipse, right? So because solar eclipses can last for months to a year, their significations, and because they do not necessarily start, they can start up to a year after the eclipse, okay? We are still and now coming into the intensification phase of the 2024 Aries eclipse that occurred April of that year. This is the intensification of that eclipse that was visible over a lot of America and was a total eclipse that was visible, over like New York and the East Coast. So we are in the intensification phase of that eclipse right now. If something happens this week, I am inclined to think that it will be more of an Aries and Mars quality rather than an Aquarius and Saturn quality. However, it's going to be a little pedantic because Saturn is moving into Aries anyway. So the planet Saturn is coming into Aries on the 13th, just before this eclipse. And it does rule the transit event of the eclipse, right? It's an eclipse in Aquarius. And Saturn, if you do all the little ways to see which planet is actually strongest and has the most influence over a transit, Saturn still wins in this case, according to myself and the peer review I received from my mentor. And so with that, we may notice the ingress of Saturn into Aries really showing up. And then the fact that an eclipse will occur by transit, still a pretty intense energy to bring about, right? It's like having a thunderstorm in weather. That being ruled by Saturn may make sort of an extension onto the experience of the transit of Saturn ingressing into Aries. So these are all the ways that you might be able to say, here's I see this, I see that it's happening. But if you want to make sure you're grounded into what is actually going on in the way astrology is practiced, at least in the traditional sense, right? These are the things that I want to be able to share with you so that you know, oh, this is the intensification phase of the Aries eclipse of 2024 showing up at the same time as Saturn ingressing into Aries, coming to conjoin with Neptune and ruling over a transiting event of an eclipse that may not actually have significations for our locality, but does actually, it's still a transiting event, right? So it's not going to be an omen of something to come. It's just that moment of a storm among the weather. Let me know if that didn't make sense and if I can make it clearer. Put it in the comments. I will clarify if needed. But I feel pretty good about that. Hey, Rocio, good to see you. So that is how I want to ground out introducing the analysis of this eclipse. A lot of the analysis we're about to do is going to be basically for funsies. And as an example, to let you know the sort of process that goes into analyzing an eclipse in what should be a pretty safe container to analyze it. And if it turns out that perhaps the eclipse does have something going on, you will be able to connect that pretty well because you will have seen how we would analyze the eclipse if we assumed it was something that was affecting our locality. And when I say our locality, the way we do that is you actually cast the chart for the location that either you are in to see exactly what's going on just for you, or the location of the center of power or leadership for wherever you live. For us, that is Washington, D.C. And so that's where I cast a lot of my charts for when I'm trying to figure out how is all of this going to affect where I live, the country that I am in. If you are not from the United States, because the US is such a squeaky wheel right now, it may also affect you just because they tend to do something and it has reverberations and repercussions. But if you wanted to make it more specific to you and decentralize the US a little bit, get it, you would do that for the center of power for your country. Cool. 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 Awesome. The reverb is going to be interesting to ride out. I'm wondering, Russ, if you mean the reverb of Saturn coming into Aries through the eclipse. It's a thing, and I am going to talk about Saturn in Aries in particular as well. So we'll talk about the eclipse, and then we'll talk about Saturn in Aries and Saturn Neptune. To be very specific, right? Saturn comes into Aries on the 13th. That is this week on Friday. I know that's before the eclipse, but one of the big events that happens with Saturn coming into Aries is the perfection of the conjunction with Saturn and Neptune. So in order to avoid confusion of talking about Saturn and Aries, then the Saturn ruled eclipse, then Saturn and Neptune, I'm going to take Saturn on his own with Neptune and put him over with the Neptune conjunction, which we will talk about after the eclipse. All right, cool. So who is ready to see a chart? And I've got several charts for you because there's some interesting things about this eclipse that, again, as a transiting event, are things that I'm studying. And that's how I want to phrase it. I am studying these things to see if they have an effect because they might, right? So that is what I'm going to do. Yeah, charts. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to show you will not actually be a chart. I'm going to take you step by step through what I would do when analyzing an eclipse according to Claudius Ptolemy and his criteria for eclipse analysis. So you're going to see my favorite websites and resources as well. All right, I need to make sure that I am showing not just a tab, but a window. And I want that one. Okay, cool. So now you can see my whole screen. You can see we have several tabs open here. We will be using these four. This is just my handy dandy reference. It's a calendar. It's really handy, actually. I recommend using this transitviewer.com if you want to. It's a nice calendar with all the stuff that goes on throughout the week. Again, just a really quick reference kind of thing. I love it. But talking about the eclipse, we come over here to timeanddate.com, which does a really good job. If you go to sun, moon, and space and go down to eclipses, you will come to the eclipses that are coming up in our timeline. And so this will show you that we are having an annular eclipse. That's a ring of fire eclipse. However, if we come down to our map here, the detailed eclipse map, which I think we can pop out here, whoop, we will see that. I want to scroll down here. There we go. It's very low. And it doesn't really, you get what, less than 50% easily of the visibility is up in populated areas over here. If we go back over here, you can see like same thing goes for lower Chile and Argentina, that kind of stuff. So the big stuff is happening right over Antarctica. It's going to be this, and you can actually see how the Earth, like it's just spinning around itself. It's so cool. One of the nifty things about this eclipse, we're going to pop back here. And there's the bigger picture of it for you. Some parts of the southern African continent will also be in that very minimal phase. And Ptolemy does have something to say about this, right? The fuller the eclipse, the fuller the effects. The least or the less occlusion of the moon to the sun in the case of a solar eclipse, the less the effects. So if you have less than half of the sun being occluded by the moon, you're going to have less than half the intensity of the effects. The more you pull back on that, you may not even notice anything. So again, this eclipse, as far as it goes in a mundane or world astrology sense, is pretty much like a glancing blow. And later we'll see. I made my mentor laugh because one of the things Ptolemy says comes from an eclipse with Saturn ruling it is a lot of cold stuff. And I was like, well, it's happening over Antarctica, so the astrology is going to astrology on that one for sure. Like no questions, right? But really, that's just me being a goof. So if you come down here, though, you will be able to see the countries where it's visible, and you'll be able to see like just how partial this is, right? French Southern territories are probably going to have the biggest show of the more populated areas, but it is so glancing for most of it. Like South Africa may also get roughly like a half, right? And it shows you where it starts and where it ends. Fun fact here is it crosses a lot of time zone lines here. So this is a little bit misleading. We do need to know the actual length of the eclipse. And it does say that somewhere on this page. I don't know where I found it, but I found it. It's like 2 minutes and 5 seconds of total occlusion of that ring of fire. And so that's the piece that we're going to take as our like the fullest experience of it. Again, only because we do not have an actual locality that we can use. We're going to use that as an example. But if, say, for the eclipse coming up, the lunar eclipse, which we will do separately later, that is visible over a lot of the United States and the Northern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. And so with that, we will see how long the eclipse lasts over Washington, D.C., if we're asking about the United States, over, the capital of your area, if you are asking about your area. How occluded is the sun? What kind of visibility do you have of the eclipse? How much can you see with glasses if it's a solar eclipse, right? And how long does it last there? Because astrology is super specific, just like your birth chart is super specific to your location, your time of birth, those kinds of things. We get super specific here in order to have more personalized predictions. So this is where I get all my data for that. You can trust me on the fact that somewhere on this page, it does say that the eclipse lasts for about 2 minutes and 5 seconds. And so that is, again, what it will last over Antarctica. And here's the countdown to the eclipse. And it's just got a lot of fun stuff here. This is the one that we'll be analyzing even more. So it's good that we're doing this now in sort of a hypothetical, so that when we get to the lunar eclipse, of a literal sense. So knowing where you can find on timeanddate.com, sun, moon, space, eclipses, that's how you can get really good, accurate information. Now, this is the chart of the event set for Washington, D.C. So we set it for what would be a new moon, right? But we know it's not just a new moon here, because if I if I look at everything here, you can see this little horseshoe here is one of the lunar nodes. It's the lunar north node. The lunar north node shows us when the moon is like at the right declination to be able to block out the sun. The closer the lunation, the new moon or the full moon is to the north node and the south node, the closer and more full the eclipse is going to be, with about a 15-degree leeway. So if it's more than 15 degrees away from the node, that's probably not going to be an eclipse. If it's within 15 degrees of the node, it's going to be an eclipse. The closer, the more total. Cool. Cool. Thank you, AJ, for sharing the timeanddate.com. Hopefully the penguins watch the live. Yeah, the researchers are there, right? So they exist there. What I did when I calculated, what we would say to the researchers if we were to tell them, hey, there's an eclipse coming and you're in the path of it, is, hey, there's an eclipse coming. It lasts 2 minutes and 5 seconds, which is about 125 seconds. And if you take that into how many, like if we take that into a year, right? If I pull up my calendar and we say 125 seconds into an hour, right? So you ask how many seconds are in an hour. So we want, what is that? 60. Oh my gosh. I know how many minutes are in a year, but I know that if I take 2 minutes, which is about 120 seconds, right? And I add 5 seconds to that, you're going to have 125 seconds. So we just want to create that as baseline as possible because we're going to have to do a portion of a year from this. And this is where, again, math gets hard for me. So bear with me. 125 seconds into an hour. So 125 seconds. So if we do 60 minutes, I think it's just 60 times 60, right? Which is 3,600, which is what I got before. Cool. So my math is good so far. That would be 3,600 seconds in an hour. So you want to get the portion of that. So you would divide 125 divided by 3,600. The opposite of what you would normally think. It's not the bigger number first. We want basically the percentage here. So you would get 0.035 of an hour is the portion that we're looking at here. But now we want to know 0.035 of a year. So let's figure out how many days, right? So if we have 0.035 divided into 365 days, what we get, I think actually we want that percentage. So it's going to be 0.035 times 365 days, which gives us about 13 days worth of time. If anybody did better math than me, please feel free to correct me. So that gives us about 13 days worth of time that we would say, hey, to all of you in Antarctica, you're going to have 13 days of significations in probably your leadership. Who is the lead researcher, I guess, or who funds the research down there? Be aware that you might have some rocky moments for about 13 days. And then you would have to figure out when that's going to begin, right? So we know it's going to last about 2 weeks for them, but when does that start? So let's use because I did try to find Antarctica in here and it didn't have a location in Luna. So we're going to use the United States. This is where something is kind of interesting here, right? If we look at the 28 degrees and 49 minutes of our new moon right here, it's exactly the same as sunrise. So this is happening at exactly sunrise in Washington, D.C. That to me is interesting. The sun will not be eclipsed when the sun rises here that day, but it will be at the same time that the moon will be in the way from the perspective of Antarctica. So it is the same time as the eclipse. But again, if we were in ancient times and did not have the global awareness we have today, you would not know an eclipse was occurring at that time. So that's something to keep in mind to, again, ground yourself. Would I know an eclipse was happening from my location back in the day? In this case, no, even though it is exactly at sunrise. If it were exactly at sunrise in Antarctica, which it's not, I think it's like 6 a.m. that it starts there. So it might be before, I don't know, because they're in like 24-hour sunlight right now anyway. What we would say is this would happen immediately. Those 13 days would begin that same day because it is on the ascendant. It is at the starting line. If it were happening somewhere in the middle, we would say it's going to be in the second third of the year that the eclipse occurred in. So we would push out 4 or so months, right? And say, okay, it's going to start in like 4-ish months. If it were closer to the descendant, we would say it's going to start at the end of the year, from the time that the eclipse started, which would begin on the day of the 17th. From February 17th to February 17th, you take that year and you break it up into thirds because it's got to occur up in here. If it's down here, again, sun's not up, so you're not seeing it. So this is where we want to break it down, and we break it down into thirds. So if it's over here, it's going to be in the first third of the year between the first and third month. This is 3 to 6 months, and then this is actually it's 1 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, right? So because it starts here, it's immediate. And we would say, okay, 13 days starting now, there it goes. That's how you would do it. So I know that was a little bit jumbled. So if it were up in the middle, right, we would say, okay, it's going to happen between 4 and 8 months after the eclipse. So that would put us what? February, March, April, May, June. So sometime from June, July, August, September, October, sometime between July and October, the start would begin, and it would last 2 weeks. If it were further, you'd go further, right? So that's how it works. It's very easy to eyeball. Numbers get caught up in my head. Dyscalculia is a thing, but that's okay. Yeah, so that's our timer to figure that out. And again, because the eclipse is not at all visible from where we are, according to Ptolemy, we don't consider it because you wouldn't have been able to see it. It can't see you. Even though eclipses are considered by some astrologers to be like the universe closing their eyes. So it wouldn't be able to see you anyway, but that's just a bad joke. So that's what we're seeing. Now we get when it's happening. Then we look at the what is happening, right? And so in order to find out what is happening, there is a really great reference. If you wanted to look, Ptolemy wrote a set of 3 books, Tetra Biblos, 3 books. And Ptolemy's 3 books in book 2, chapter 8, goes into how to know what's going to happen depending on who rules this eclipse. Now, this eclipse is in Aquarius. Saturn rules the eclipse. Saturn is in fall. So we're like, dang, really wish he wasn't running the show, because how able is this planet to drive a car, right? The helm of the ship in our modern day would be the steering wheel of a car. And since the first house, the rising sign, is considered the helm of the chart, and the ruler of that is the person at the helm steering, I look at the planet and I think, okay, is Saturn totally sober, had really good rest, not hangry or cranky, not likely to, road rage? Great. If Saturn were in Aquarius, I would be like, okay, cool. Saturn is ready to drive, ready for a long road trip. We're good. I feel safe. Saturn is in Aries. Aries is the sign of Saturn's fall because Saturn is exalted up in Libra. So he's in the opposite place of that. Saturn just got yelled at by a lot of people and is probably not feeling so great about it. And so you're getting in the car with a cranky Saturn. And there may be some road rage that goes along with that. So we ask, is Saturn equipped to do the reliable Saturn things? No. So the ruler of the eclipse is not always the ruler of the sign of the eclipse. We're just lucky in this case that Saturn has the most testimony, I guess, lucky, has the most testimony for all the different criteria that we are given to analyze an eclipse. And so in this case, it still goes to Saturn. Saturn still wins. And that's a little bit unfortunate given Saturn's condition over here. Not a happy camper in Aries, and coming up on Neptune, who is very antithetical to Saturn's archetypes. We'll get into that later, but like Saturn does hard lines and Neptune comes by, giggles, and like blurs them all. That's truly the impression I get from how this is going in a sort of characterization sense. So knowing that, we go to Ptolemy and we say, hey, Ptolemy, when Saturn rules an eclipse, what happens? And so Ptolemy would say in this little paragraph right here that we are going to get things called destruction by cold. Now, this is some critical astrological thinking for you. Yes, that extra mile this time because it's really fun and exciting. And it's going to tear down a lot of the gatekeeping in astrology for you when you want to analyze astrological texts. So Saturn, when he gains sole dominance, when everything says Saturn runs the show, is in general the cause of destruction. Why? Because Saturn is the greater malefic. Right? So Saturn is just doing what Saturn was going to do. So Saturn tends to destroy things, tends to decay things, tends to bring things down. If you had a Saturn return, you know what I mean. So we're not surprised to see destruction. And then destruction by cold, and in particular, when the event concerns men, long illnesses, Saturn, duration, right? Saturn does time, consumptions, withering, disturbances caused by fluids, rheumatisms, and quartan fevers, exile, poverty, imprisonment, mourning, fears, and deaths, especially among those advanced in age. Again, all of these are just Saturn keywords. And Ptolemy is being like, hey, since Saturn is cold and dry by nature, if you go by the Aristotelian qualities of everything has a couple elements of like melancholic and dry and all that other stuff. Saturn is melancholic and is cold and dry. So, of course, destruction, Saturn by cold, what Saturn does. He's just plugging in the keywords and making a list for us to draw from, right? Saturn rules people who are advanced in age, old people, right? Saturn is Kronos. Saturn is, the one carrying the scythe. Saturn is sort of that Grim Reaper archetype as well. And so that's not surprising for Saturn. If you jump down to Jupiter, you're actually going to get a really nice eclipse. It just so happens that Saturn is the greater malefic. So we see things that are harder for us to want to deal with. He's usually significant with regard to those dumb animals. Dumb animals are just not domesticated. Animals are not dumb. They're awesome, that are of use to man. So we're thinking of animals that would be useful in working animals, right? But brings about scarcity to them, the things that help you, because Saturn's involved. Bodily destruction by disease, of such as exist, so whatever there happens to be at the time, so that the men who use them are similarly affected and perish. People who rely on those animals for their livelihoods will not have what they need to function, right? Just like Saturn in fall doesn't have what he needs, these people will not have what they need either. Now remember, grounding back in, we don't see this. This is not an eclipse that is visible from where we are. So it's not really something that we have to worry about. And I don't think there are too many working animals down in Antarctica. So I feel pretty okay about that too. Maybe they'll have technological malfunctions. It is an air sign and we can consider it that way in a modern age. But who knows if we'll hear about it. With regard to weather, he causes fearful cold, freezing, misty, and pestilential. So just really biting cold. But again, this is happening over Antarctica. So I'm sure they're adapted to it. Corruption of the air, clouds, and gloom. Furthermore, multitudes of snowstorms, not beneficial but destructive, from which are produced the reptiles harmful to man. I'm not really sure what he means there, but if Godzilla comes out of Antarctica around the time of this eclipse, I will feel like it is safe to say the astrology is astrologing, which is my new least favorite phrase. As for the rivers and seas, in general, he causes storms, wreck of fleets, disastrous voyages, scarcity and death of fish, in particular, the high ebb of tides of the seas and rivers, excessive floods, and pollution of the waters. Travel happened a lot by waters back in these times. So they were really concerned about, like, if I travel right now, which is going to be by sea, how's that going to go? So that's why that gets incorporated here a lot too. And then we talk about crops because it's another very important thing. He brings want, scarcity, loss. Saturn does those things, especially to those grown for necessary uses because Saturn doesn't do excess. Either through worms or locusts, things that are under the ground, Saturn does those things. So Saturn will exhume what is under the ground in order to bring these issues. Also will cause floods, cloudbursts, hail, or the like, so that famine and destruction of men thereby result. Yes, I know. It's not our favorite thing to read about. But hey, the next eclipse is in Virgo. So we'll have Mercury to look at for this one. And we'll come down here and talk about Mercury and the things associated with him at the time. So that is how we would analyze this, right? And then you take your intuition and your knowledge as an astrologer and infuse it into that. And so you would say, hey, because I know that we're dealing with this kind of stuff, we can expect this to happen because you're there, you're living it. And you can say, in the context that is meaningful for us, here's what's important. Ptolemy also does say, like, I'm not going to list everything here because that would be ridiculous. You have to do some critical thinking yourself as the person who is making the prediction in that moment. He does say that. And that's fair. The one thing I can get to now that I think is fascinating, that may connect this, and I really think this is a long shot. I think I'm doing a bit of an astrological backflip here, but I'm going to bring it up out of a curiosity and a research, which is the way I want you guys to see it as well, right? The eclipse is happening at 28 degrees of Aquarius. Now, Ptolemy also says if the eclipse is very important to the sun and the moon, especially in your natal chart, the chart of your leaders, or the chart of your nation, the significant charts for you, right? Then you would pay attention. Still, the qualification is if it were visible, right? So it's not visible. This is a little bit of a leap, like I said. But if we come to the most commonly used chart for the United States of America, which is the Sibley chart, I also have this down here is the eclipse. So on the inside here, we have the United States' chart. You can see here that the moon for the United States is at 27 Aquarius. And the eclipse is at 28 Aquarius. So that's a conjunction. This eclipse is happening right on the moon of the United States. The transit of this eclipse, drawing in some of the intensity of having the nodes nearby, perhaps may show us something. But again, here's how I would analyze this if I were you. Whatever headlines we notice during the week of the 17th, pay attention to what you know about the archetypes and the rulerships of the planets. Are we looking at Saturnian things like we just analyzed? Or are we looking at martial things? Because if we're looking at martial things, then you're actually going to want to blame in Aries, because that is in its intensification phase right now. What we did in the beginning of showing how Ptolemy would time it out, that's how we would do it. So even within that, within the, like, it starts here and it goes for this long, there's an intensification phase, usually in the same portion, right? So if we did that, right, here we would say, okay, it's going to happen immediately. The intensification is going to be at the early phases because it's at the ascendant. If it were up here, it would be in the second third of the year, so 4 to 8 months, but in the second third of that quarter of the year. So we're just fractaling it down to say, how narrow can we make this based on the data that we have? That's how a lot of astrology goes. It'll start big picture, and then it'll repeat the equation on a smaller scale, and repeat the equation on a smaller scale, and repeat the equation on a smaller scale until you get down to days, in which case now you can observe and be very specific about your predictions. So there we go. If we were to look at this personally, right, and say, okay, provided that this is also a new moon, what does that mean for me? My recommendations right now is to take the Aquarian cue, focus on the big picture, focus on your strategy, and noticing what Saturn is up to, right? Saturn is in Aries. Saturn does boundaries, and right now those boundaries are getting corrupted. They're falling apart. So figure out where your boundaries are. How are they changing? You might be tearing down some walls to rebuild them in different ways or on different foundations because you understand something more than you did however long ago, because new information is coming to light and it's really helping you know who you are, what you stand for, and what you won't tolerate. Focus on the big picture, zoom in on yourself and say, what does this all mean to me, where I stand, and what I support? What's important to me? What are my boundaries? How do I teach people how I am allowed to be treated, how they are allowed to treat me? As we said earlier, if you have any kind of planets, especially the sun and moon, specifically in that same range as the eclipse, the 28th degree of, technically the 29th degree of Aquarius, but let's not get too pedantic here, in that area of Aquarius, or if you are an Aquarius rising, if you are a Taurus rising, Scorpio rising, or a Leo rising, because this will then aspect very important parts of your chart, then you may feel the transit of this new moon / solar eclipse a little bit more, right? Also, if Saturn is your time lord right now, or if Aquarius is activated for you by timing with things, most specifically, I would say annual perfections for sign-based stuff. You could say zodiacal releasing, but that's, again, very high level, overarching stuff. So less likely to impact you at this lower scale, right? So check your rising sign. If it's a fixed rising sign, any of those signs I just mentioned, you may notice this. I'm probably gonna. And also, if you have very personal placements like your sun and your moon around that 28 degree and some change of Aquarius, you may also notice this. Affirmation I'm recommending for people is, I know who I am and what I stand for. Like I mentioned before, know your boundaries. Start with, my favorite color is blue, and it is because The because will tell you why you believe things. And then when someone questions it, you will be less likely to waffle because you know why you believe it. And suddenly their pushing doesn't mean as much anymore. So that's my like boundary hack that I use. Also therapy. I recommend therapy in the best of ways, especially with Neptune involved. There's a lot of subconscious stuff that can be coming to the front. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute when we get to focusing on Saturn and Neptune. So again, consider your boundaries that may be getting a lot of challenges to them lately. Are your boundaries being pushed? Is someone pushing your buttons? Are they poking at your defenses? And then ask yourself, do I need to reaffirm this boundary, or is this boundary ready to change? Like, am I pushing up against something that's like, actually, I'm not really bothered by that anymore, but that's non-negotiable. So those are the things that I would look at. What are the things that you are, remaking in your life? What is something that you are supported by, that you support? And who do you want to be? Because the person that you want to be, you can build that trait by trait, boundary by boundary. And then that is who you are. That's who you get to be. So that is my extra long analysis of our new moon / solar eclipse in Aquarius. Thank you for coming to my Astro TED Talk. Ha. Yes, needed boundaries or expired boundaries, right? They're allowed to change. I know Saturn's a very consistent dude, but like in Aries, we're in cardinal fire now. Change is everything. So any questions on the eclipse before we move into just talking about Saturn and Neptune? Yay. Awesome. Astro TED Talks for the win. I'm so glad that made sense and that was fun for you guys. Cool. It was fun for me too. But yeah, now you get a little bit behind the scenes of like, what are astrologers doing when they're looking at eclipses? And how can I look at an eclipse in a calm and rational way? So fun stuff. Awesome. Great. Looks like we're feeling pretty good about that. Amazing. I appreciate you all. Next, like I said, I want to narrow in on these two right here. Now, because I've been looking at it a ton, I do know that it's going to be on the 20th that they perfect their conjunction. There we go. 43, 44, Saturn's moving faster. So we'll go by hours here. Click around until we get to, there we go. So Saturn and Neptune's conjunction. This is where we're at now. Arrow 5, I appreciate you. I really want to be a good teacher. So it makes me feel really good when people feel like I've taught effectively, because it's not about the teacher, right? It's about how effectively they get something across. And there's a lot of gates in astrology right now, and I want to tear them all down. So we're happy with that. I know who I am and what I stand for. Whoop, whoop. Awesome. Okay. So on the 14th, and here, we'll do it this way. So you have a nice, like, easier to digest way of looking at this. You are here right now on the 9th, right? Venus comes into Pisces tomorrow. This is a free website, by the way. Totally free. You can buy them a coffee down here if you want to support them. I recommend all the stuff that's happening here. They've even added Mercury's shadow phase. So we're not in Mercury retrograde yet. That's down here. But Mercury is going to come into the degrees that they will cover again during that retrograde on the 11th. So you'll have that awareness as well. Not always bad to have. Kind of nice. This is the thing I'm looking at this week. This, we might notice something associated with it, right? Events tend to correlate, or, there's the whole correlation or causation thing. I like to say correlation. Typically, when a planet changes signs, especially into a sign that has meaning for that planet, we notice that shift. So tomorrow, again, we might notice Venus getting out of Aquarius and coming into the sign of her exaltation, which is nice and sweet and poetic and romantic and artsy and lovely, right? And a beautiful expression of it, I will not stop talking about this because it makes me so happy, is that while Venus moves into the sign of her exaltation into Pisces, which is a Jupiter sign, right? It's ruled by Jupiter and Venus is exalted there. Both benefics are celebrated and supported in the sign of Pisces. And Pisces is this mutable water sign. And so we get a lot of like emotional stuff associated with it, intuitive stuff associated with it. A lot of that comes into subconscious work, the sea of subconscious, if you will, the depth of our minds. And so Pisces, with all of that, stillness, mindfulness, peace, you might say, or monks that support all of those things, finally arriving after a journey that started in October into the city that is their goal, where they will lead. You can watch this live online too. They're going to lead a whole like just peace assembly there, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be so beautiful, and I'm really excited that the astrology corresponds with it so well. So um that is an example of how we already can anticipate a really cool thing happening in association with this planet transiting into a new sign. Ingressing into a new sign is the official term. Saturn's the opposite of that. So hold on to your Venus for this week, okay? Saturn is slower. Saturn is coming into Aries for the first time in 30 years. Again, Saturn takes 30 years to go all the way around. So it's been 30 years since Saturn was last in Aries to stay. Saturn did have a brief stint last spring into like summerish in Aries, and then got back into Pisces sometime in, I think it was September, and has been in Pisces since then. Now is moving into Aries and will stay in Aries until 2028, when the transition will begin from Aries into Taurus. So this is a heavier moment. Saturn, if you're wondering, rules the metal lead. Think about the lead balloon, right? So Saturn has, we read all the qualities of Saturn in Ptolemy just a little earlier, right? So Saturn is the greater malefic. It is a big, heavy planet. It does things. It's supposed to do things. It wants to do things having to do with boundaries and structures and the systems that are supportive. It's very much the story of the three little pigs, right? The one who builds their house out of brick on stone is Saturn. That is Saturn at Saturn's best. However, Aries is not where Saturn is at their best. So anything, it's not necessarily that you didn't build something on stone or with brick to begin with, but it's been a while. So that mortar that you used may be crumbling. And so now suddenly the walls are falling down, right? And so we're going through this period of what I had built before is no longer the right support or the right shelter for me into the future. The lines that we draw during the period of time of Saturn and Aries will be the foundations that we stand on for years to come, right? Saturn does long periods of time. And as soon as Saturn comes into Aries, hanging out at that 0 degree, Saturn will be within the same degree as Neptune. They will meet up exactly a week later on the 20th. People have been talking about this for a long time. So we've had Saturn and Neptune dancing in around the same degree as each other for the last year. So what we're seeing here is the culmination of all of this. It is the rising action coming to the climactic moment. And so that climactic moment may give us this quintessential event that we will look back in a couple of years at that Saturn Neptune conjunction and be like, oh yeah, that was that era where this happened. Saturn Pluto conjunction. And so we will always look back at COVID and be like, yeah, COVID, Saturn Pluto, got it. Saturn Neptune, different archetypes, like different significations. Neptune again is blurring the lines. Neptune is the primordial sea where life is ready to emerge from. And Aries, of course, is very much close to that life-giving spark. So we're seeing a lot of conflicting elements happening here. Things that don't typically fit together in a nice, peaceful way. Things that are saying, hey, there's attention required here. There's change required here. Neptune, again, very close to some of the Piscean significations. Neptune does a lot with psychiatry, with psychology, with therapy, with, going deep into our spirituality, our subconscious, our minds, the space within. And Saturn is saying, hey, to all of that that has no boundaries and no shape to it, let's give it a container. Let's give it a name. Let's put some structure to it so that we can picture it and give it a symbol. One of the coolest things that I've noticed popping up right now is people talking about symbols for the movements of our time, right? Until you give something that we can identify it with, it's hard to notice, like, yes, this is what that is. Yes, this is my safe space. Yes, this is where I want to be, or this is how I know how to get there. because you don't have the recognizable symbols. Well, Saturn is going to say, hey, to this movement, to this event, to this thing in whatever capacity that has no name, let's give it one. To this thing that has no space, let's give it a container. That's kind of nice, right? That's one of the things I'm looking forward to of this period of time. It's going to, of course, have all of the connotations, right? A conjunction is not, of the nature of Mars like a square, or of the nature of Saturn like an opposition, or Venus with a sextile, or Jupiter with a trine. We don't get that. It is just putting Saturn and Neptune in a blender and getting all of it, right? So it's like a cosmic gusher. It just is. So you have, the container, which is Saturn, and the oozy part, which is Neptune. And it's this gummy, God knows what flavor you're going to get this time situation. It's Birdie Bot's every flavor beans. But the flavors, of course, can only be within the archetypes of Saturn and Neptune. And they are very counter to each other, right? Saturn is truly the last visible planet that you do not need a telescope to see. It is the last planet the ancients considered because it was the only one that they could see. It was the furthest one out there. So it marks the boundary between the tangible composite world made up of all the things and what lies beyond, which we tend to say in modern times is more the collective, the social experience, the transpersonal kind of vibe and wavelength. Everything else is like, our governments, our, systems, our stems, our whatever. They all have like tangible things to hold on to. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not so preoccupied by those limits, right? So we have Saturn saying, hey, Neptune, I know you're the ocean, but I'm going to give you a container. I'm going to let you fill a space. I'm going to show you what shape you should be, right? Drawing a line around the lake to see what it should be, right? This is the man-made reservoir, so to speak. Yeah, sticky in your teeth. Yes, gushers are very much like that. So Saturn, which does boundaries, and Neptune, which dissolves things and creates illusions and creates fantasies, and all of these other very Jungian concepts kind of suit the Neptunian archetypes. We find them coming together. So that which has a boundary that needs to dissolve, that boundary will go away. But then you get something that now requires a new container, and that's where Saturn comes in to draw those lines. So it's very much like watercolor, right? It's creating a picture that you can start out with hard lines, but you're allowing them to blur, and you're letting that be part of the beauty. This is one of the reasons I had mentioned earlier why I think we are reforging, Aries, our boundaries. So allowing some boundaries to dissolve. It reminds me of like when you drop acid onto a pipe and it just sort of erodes away really fast, but then you have to replace the pipe. That is kind of the image that comes up when I think about this conjunction. And in the context of Aries, that cardinal fire, it is saying, right here, right now, what's important to me? Right here, right now, what do I believe in? Right here, right now, what am I going to tolerate and what won't I? So knowing just what's important to you, right? It doesn't have to be a grand thing. It doesn't have to be going out and getting all radical unless you want to, but it can be something as simple as like, this is important to me. And if you want to talk to me about it, we're going to talk about it like this, or I'm going to walk away. Easy peasy. Well, easier said than done, but still. And I always see the astrology coming up because I work so closely with the planets and things, and they truly are my spirit guides. I see the astrology coming up when I talk to my therapist pretty much every week. And I have been doing a lot of reading about boundaries lately. And I've been doing a lot of relearning about boundaries, because I knew some about it, right? I've been doing personal development my whole life. It's been a thing, but relearning it, having that click of like, oh, this is what it looks like for me now. You are allowed to change. Aries is saying it is time to acknowledge that change. But also, if you're going to honor and acknowledge that change, you need to give it space in your life. You need to look into the corners of your mind that may feel a little bit too quiet and we don't want to go there. Maybe it's time to go in there and say, hey, I'm going to give you a name. And now we're going to feel more familiar with each other and it's going to be okay. So those are some of the things I'm noticing that may happen on a more personal level with the Saturn-Neptune situation. And again, this is going to be something that may feel familiar because we've been in this energy for a year. We haven't had it super duper long in Aries. Again, last summer is probably the longest stint that we had that time of Saturn and Neptune hanging out within a degree of each other in Aries. So think back to last summer and decide, how do I want to quantify that? What container do I want to give that? And what does it look like for me to say this? And now I get to build from here, right? We get to really complete and finalize, punctuate that story. So I took up a lot of our time with this. And for that, I'm not really sorry. I'm glad you guys are here. But I do have about 5 minutes that I can do some answers to questions, add on to it a little bit. Let me know, how did this feel? And how can I make it feel even more grounded? We do not have Monday Magic Mood Boost next week because I'm going on vacation. It's my like first actual real vacation, and probably since my birthday in 2021. It's just me and Dan going to Hawaii, and I'm going to learn how to do astro photography. I'm going to learn how to take pictures of stars with my phone. And I'm going to teach everybody I ever meet how to do it. So if you're ever on one of our trips in Peru, in Germany, in Greece this year, inevitably my excitement is going to come with me, and I will teach you how to take pictures of the stars and things. So those are important. Gabe, hey, good to see you. I did not see Russ's question. With eclipse timing, do you keep a running track of each one as they overlap? I do. I do. You do not have to. And again, remember, you can narrow it down. You don't have to keep all of them together. You can say which ones apply to me based on where I am at, the visibility of the eclipse from my location, and that kind of stuff. The most important one to me and to my mentor, as we've been studying these together, is the 2024 Aries eclipse that happened very visibly over the United States, particularly the part of the United States that I'm in. And so I track that one because it went over the United States Capitol. And so that can have effects for the country as a whole, because that's where the decisions are made, be they good or dumb. So yeah, focal length and exposure time are key. So I've heard. Yep. Cool. I'm going to go look for Russ's question really quick. I really missed it. I don't know where it is. Russ, if you want to ask your question again, I did not ignore you. I'm very excited. Oh, here we go. Liminality. I'm not sure. Are we talking about the eclipse? And do you mean actual like occlusion? Because for the eclipse, again, you're going to do the exact moment of the eclipse and how long it lasts for where you are. So our example earlier was how long the eclipse lasts over Antarctica, because it's not going to happen over the United States. So we just used the longest one that exists, which was 2 minutes and 5 seconds. But you would go to timeanddate.com, go to your capital city nearest you or the one that you're interested in, and it will tell you how long it lasts. Function and the effect of it is happening. Oh, okay. Saturn and Neptune are slow planets. So like I said, we've been seeing them dancing within a degree or two of each other for a year now. So the exact conjunction is going to happen on the 20th, and then they will start separating, but they're slow. So this is something that, because it's slow, we're going to see it happening on a higher level of our experience. You may notice some stuff that day that really pops off in your personal life, perhaps, especially if Saturn's important to your timing right now, but give it months, to be honest, of really unfolding. But like I said, that day, at most, what I would expect is some kind of crack kind of event that it's like when we look back, we're going to be like, oh, yeah, that. The example I gave earlier was 2020's pandemic, right? Especially the pandemic itself, which kind of began right around the conjunction of Saturn Pluto. We remember all of 2020 that way, right? Especially January through like June. So months to a year, we remember that way as we look back. This is another one of those situations. Neptune also takes a long time. Saturn also takes a long time. So we will have the last year of it having built up. It'll come together, and then we'll have give it a year, give it a couple months of it separating. So again, plenty of time to process and work through any of the emotions that come up, and plenty of time for us as a world and as a people to work through anything that is brought up that we need to address together. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. Yeah. Yeah, great question, Russ. I hope I was helpful in the way I explained it at that point. Yeah. So that became an hour-long lecture on astrology, y'all. But again, I hope it was clear. I hope it was fun. I hope it was interesting. I will see you guys on Wednesday for our Twitch this week. Next week, I'm going to be off the whole week. So Wednesday and Friday, there will be a Twitch stream. Friday, there will be an ink spill. And today, you will get a new episode of The Alchemist Inkwell. So that's all the stuff that is coming for you. Also, I will be on social media throughout the week. So catch my posts as they come up there as well. Thank you all. I appreciate you. Stay safe this week. Remember, Venus comes into Pisces tomorrow, and the celebrate and be excited about just as much as we're talking about the hard stuff. Do not ignore the beautiful stuff. And that is so beautiful, like chef's kiss beautiful. I love it so much. So enjoy it. Watch the live broadcast online if you can, or whatever makes you feel like you are leaning into that side of the energy. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you all on Wednesday.